Reacting to the big news today, Vice President Vance, the second Catholic VP in our history, congratulating Pope Leo XIV on X moments ago, writing this, quote, "I'm sure millions of American Catholics and other Christians will pray for his successful work leading the church. May God bless him." And here in Washington, just a bit earlier, I spoke with the vice president about a range of topics, from what to expect in the months ahead for the economy, given the tariff discussions, to Elon Musk, to his status as President Trump's potential successor and whether or not he wants that job. Here's our interview. Joe Biden came out and did an interview yesterday. He said that the famous Zelensky Oval Office confrontation was, quote, beneath America. What would you say to the former president?
Well, I think it's rich for Joe Biden to comment on anything that we're doing when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, because, of course, under Biden's administration, Russia launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And if we wanted to take advice from anybody on foreign policy, especially foreign policy in Europe, it would not be Joe Biden. So I wish Joe Biden the best. I don't really care what he has to say about American foreign policy, because so much of what he actually did was a total disaster. If we just did the opposite of what Joe Biden did, I think we'd have one of the most successful foreign policy administrations in a very long time. So he can spend his time on the beach or doing whatever Joe Biden does. We'll continue trying to fix the problems that he created.
So sticking with Russia and Ukraine, yesterday you spoke with the Munich Security Conference here in D.C.
Yeah.
You said that Russia is essentially asking for too much in a deal to settle the war with Ukraine. So what do we do now? Do we walk away from this situation, or is it time to ramp up our military support for Ukraine?
Well, we'll see what happens, of course. But look, we knew that Russia would ask for too much because the Russian perception of the war is on the ground. They're winning. And of course, the Ukrainians would like to do a ceasefire, in part because things have not been going so well for the Ukrainians the last few months. And our attitude is we don't want Ukraine to collapse. We obviously want Ukraine to remain a sovereign country, but Russia can't expect to be given territory that they haven't even conquered yet. And that's one of the things that they put down in that initial peace plan. So I actually think it's progress that they're even talking at all, the Russians and the Ukrainians. I think it's progress that they're putting concrete peace plans on the table. But we knew that the Russians' first offer would be too much. We knew that they would ask for more than was reasonable to give. That's how negotiations often work. I'm not bothered by that. What would bother me is if we conclude that the Russians are not engaging in the negotiation in good faith. And if that happens, yeah, we're going to walk away. The president's going to say we're out of this thing. And what that's going to mean fundamentally, I think, is that both Russia and Ukraine are going to be left to settle this thing without the advice and without the mediation of the United States. I don't think that's good for anybody. I don't think it's good for us. I don't think it's good for Russia or Ukraine. But we can only lead these guys to the well. We can't force them to drink. And that's what the president has done. And I do think we've had some diplomatic breakthroughs. Again, the fact the Russians are offering a peace plan at all, that's a breakthrough. The fact the Ukrainians are offering a concrete proposal, that's a breakthrough. But we've got to try to get these sides a little bit closer together to achieve a lasting peace. We're not there yet. We'll keep working on it until we decide that we ultimately can't make any more progress.
And then you would walk away?
We would.
All right. You were in India recently, and there was some feeling that that might lead to one of the trade agreements announced. And we just heard the UK agreement with the United States.
Sure.
How concerned is the administration about the potential for nuclear war between India and Pakistan?
Well, look, we're concerned about any time nuclear powers collide and have a major conflict. What we've said, what Secretary Rubio said, and certainly the president has said, is we want this thing to de-escalate as quickly as possible. We can't control these countries, though. Fundamentally, India has its gripes with Pakistan. Pakistan has responded to India. What we can do is try to encourage these folks to de-escalate a little bit, but we're not going to get involved in the middle of a war that's fundamentally none of our business and has nothing to do with America's ability to control it. You know, America can't tell the Indians to lay down their arms. We can't tell the Pakistanis to lay down their arms. And so we're going to continue to pursue this thing through diplomatic channels. Our hope and our expectation is that this is not going to spiral into a broader regional war or, God forbid, a nuclear conflict. But sure, we're worried about these things. But I think the job of diplomacy, but also the job of cooler heads in India and Pakistan, is to make sure this doesn't become a nuclear war. If it happened, of course, it would be disastrous. Right now, we don't think that's going to happen.
All right, let's talk about the U.S. economy as some of your colleagues are heading to Switzerland to try to work a deal with China. Why was the UK deal first? Is it the sort of the model for other deals? And why not go to the EU first, a bigger deal?
Well, first, I think we have a great relationship with the United Kingdom. You know, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister visited a few weeks ago. We had very good conversations with them. I think they were very responsive. I mean, look, President Trump has said very simply, all he wants at a lot of these trade negotiations is fairness, is reciprocity. He wants other markets to be as fair to American workers, frankly, as America has been to these foreign workers for decades, in some cases generations. And the United Kingdom was very willing to work with us. I think we had a great rapport with them. They were very open to hearing our concerns, and of course we heard some of their issues too. It was a good conversation. It was a good negotiation. It led to a successful result.
So with China, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has said that, he doesn't want to decouple. He just wants fair trade. But when you look at China and the trust issues, they're our biggest adversary. How can they be our biggest trading partner at the same time?
Well, first of all, what the president has said is clearly we need to rebalance global trade. American workers and American businesses have lost a lot by absorbing all of this trade from other countries when these countries don't take nearly as much from America as we take from them. That's a fundamentally losing proposition, and we're going to change it. And of course, China has been the worst offender. But I think that, look, what has happened right now, the last couple of months, is basically trade between China and the United States has stopped completely. The president has been very clear. He thinks that we have the cards, of course, because we take much more from China than China does from us. But we're going to have a conversation with them. We'll see where it leads. And ultimately, we just want to deal with any country, whether it's China or anybody else, that makes American workers and American businesses in a better position. We just want a fairer deal for American workers, and that's what President Trump is fighting for. I think that it's very achievable with a whole host of countries, but that's the guiding light.
So the president said, maybe American kids should have $3 instead of 30 or whatever the number was. Do you agree? Do you tell the people of this country that you need to make some sacrifices in order to reorganize this bad trade relationship?
Well, I think the president's point here is that, yeah, we do need to become more self-reliant, and that's not going to happen overnight, and it's not always going to be easy, Martha. But what I'd ask people is not whether they want $2 or $5 or $20 for their kids. I'd ask American moms and dads, would you like to be able to go into a pharmacy and know that the drugs your kids need are actually available to you as an American parent? Would you like to, God forbid, if your country goes to a war and your son or daughter is sent off to fight, would you like to know that the weapons that they have are good American-made stuff, not made by a foreign adversary? What President Trump is talking about is bringing self-reliance back to the United States economy. We haven't had it pretty much in my entire life. Martha, we've lost jobs, we've lost supply chain, critical minerals, critical goods have been manufactured by our adversaries. All the president is saying is, wouldn't you like to live in a country that is self-reliant and strong again? And his policies are going to make that happen.
But I guess the question goes back to how much pain, or how do you explain to the American people, look, this is the goal. We think it's a good goal for the country. But getting there, you have the Fed saying, we're not going to cut interest rates at this point, which the president said, he called Jerome Pal a fool on Truth Social last night for that assessment. But Pal is saying we need to make sure that unemployment doesn't go higher and that inflation doesn't go higher. And he's still concerned about those two things. What's your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, I think the president's right about Jerome Pal. Jerome Pal, he's a nice guy, but he's been wrong about almost everything. He was way too late in combating the Biden inflation, and now I think he's way too late in actually helping us fight back against some of these ridiculous trade deals that have stolen the wealth of the American people. And so I think Jerome Powell's just wrong about that. But when you ask this question about pain, look, the real pain here, Martha, is that we inherited an economy that had the highest peacetime deficits in United States history. We had $34 trillion in debt and growing under Joe Biden's economy. And the president has been very honest with the American people. You don't get back to peace and prosperity by doing the same thing that you've done under the Biden administration, or frankly, that we've done in this country for 40 years. We've got to take this country in a different direction. We've got to renegotiate some of these trade deals. We've got to open up foreign markets to American-made things, and we've got to make our country more self-reliant. These are long-term big plays. I think they're going to make Americans richer and more prosperous. But yeah, this stuff doesn't happen overnight, as the president has said.
So with regard to the debt, which you just pointed out,
Sure.
Some conservative economists look at this one big beautiful bill and they say, gee, that's a lot of debt that is going to be added as part of this process. What do you say to them?
Well, I'm skeptical of them. I talked to Kevin Hassett, who I think is probably the best conservative economist around. And what these guys underappreciate is that the best way to defeat our debt long term is growth. If we have an economy that's growing at 1% a year, there is no way out of the debt problem in the United States of America. If the economy is growing at 3 or even 4% a year, that is the way that you solve the problem. And so what this tax bill accomplishes fundamentally is it grows the American economy, I think, in the biggest way in a generation. Now, if you go back to the first Trump administration, Martha, you had a lot of economists who said the tax bill is going to lead to a reduction in federal revenue. The tax bill is going to blow up the debt. What actually happened is that revenues went up, and then, of course, until the COVID pandemic and then the presidency of Joe Biden, America's financial house was in much, much better shape than it was under the previous administration. So we know that these guys are skeptical. We know that a lot of them are skeptical of reshoring American manufacturing. We think that they're wrong. We think that we've tried their way of business for 40 years. It's led to high debt. It's led to poorer American citizens. It's led to young people who can't afford to buy a home in their own country. We're not going to do the same old thing that we've done and expect different results. We're going to try the Trump way, and I think it's going to deliver long-term prosperity for the country. Let
me ask you about the improper payments that we've seen, because it feels that Elon Musk is sunsetting out of here, and he says he'll still be paying attention to the Doge issue. But, they found about $160-some billion in cuts, which obviously is great.
Sure.
It's a step in the right direction. But the original promise was $2 trillion, and there is still so much waste out there. So, the fraud that has been found, are we going to see people prosecuted for stealing American taxpayer money through the government?
So first of all, yes, I think that we will, because there's been explicit fraud committed. And I talked to Pam Bondi about this. I know that she's working on building the case against some of these people who have committed absolute fraud on the American people. You're going to see some of those prosecutions over the next few years. But of course, people have their right in court, and Pam Bondi is going to do a real investigation, uncover the facts, and then file a lawsuit if she thinks that the facts warrant it. I think the facts will warrant it for a number of people. But on Elon, look, Elon's not disappearing. And you talked about $160 billion in savings. First of all, that's a lot. And second of all, nobody said that the work of Doge would only last 110 days, and that would be it. We think that there are a lot of fraudulent people claiming Medicaid or Medicare benefits, meaning illegal aliens, people who have no entitlement legally to be on those programs and are stealing from the American citizens who actually do deserve those programs. So we think there's a lot more waste and fraud that we can find. We think we're going to save the American people a lot more money. But look, if we stopped at $160 billion of pure waste and fraud, that would be an unbelievable increase in government efficiency. That's something to be proud of, but we're going to keep on working at it.
All right, last question, because I know you have to go. The president was asked who his successor should be, and he mentioned you, what a fantastic job you're doing, he said. And in the next breath, he mentioned Marco Rubio. So, of course, the latest headline is Trump stokes Vance-Rubio competition. Are you rivals with Marco Rubio?
Not at all. Look, Marco is actually probably my best friend in the administration. We hang out and talk all the time. He's doing a really good job. And, of course, I'm doing the best job that I can. My attitude on this is, Martha, the president's not going to name a successor 110 days into his administration, nor should he. We have to do a good job for the American people. And if we do that, the politics will take care of themselves.
But now that you've been this close for 100 days, can you see yourself in that job?
I can see myself doing a really good job for the next 1,100 days, and then the American people can figure it out from there.
All right, we'll stay tuned. Vice President JD Vance, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
All right, so for the whole interview, you can tune into Fox Nation. It'll be available streaming there shortly.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.